Alright, so last video I made an infinite tier list on anime Vanguards. So this video will just be the same thing, but for Paragon mode, challenge mode, and story mode. So the 15 wave game modes. So yeah, let's just get started. So firstly, in D tier, we have a bunch of rare and epic units. The epic units in D tier aren't really useful at all, and the buff units aren't really going to be useful in Paragon either, because they just take up a unit slot that you could be using for, let's say, a farm or a higher damage unit. As well as that, they just take up a lot of money. So, like I said, you could just spend that on upgrading your damage units to a higher upgrade instead of wasting it on a buff unit. So next is C tier obviously, and we just have a bunch of decent epic units with some good passive abilities, and we also have Grimoire, the most disappointing legendary in the entire game. It's high cost, low damage, but of course the damage is going to be better than the other epics lower than this. And as for these other epics, they tend to have some quite decent abilities, like Killua, he stuns half the time if he's in a frenzy. Genos has pretty high SPA. Gaara, his SPA is halved as the round goes on, so he has an SPA of 3 with some decent 200 damage, which it's pretty good for an epic, so yeah, they're in C tier. Alright, now on to B tier. So as you can see, most of these are just unevolved mythics. Matter of fact, all of them are unevolved mythics. So usually unevolved mythics are quite low damage and high cost. So even though they are better than certain epics and legendaries, they are still way too expensive to actually be considered good. And it's not even just the cost, it's the fact that they don't do as much damage as certain legendaries would, even using the same price. So yeah, they are going to be this low on the list. So okay, so in A tier we have all of these units. I'm just going to get the elephant in the room out of the way. Igris is in here because in its unevolved form, it takes a ton of money to upgrade, and it's only a medium-sized circle AoE. So it is really not worth the money because it only does 1,500 damage on maxing, which a lot of these units do. Well, in terms of DPS, because if you take Goku Black for example, he does about 1,200 damage with his passive ability, and his SPA is around 4 seconds, I believe. So it's literally the same amount of damage for Igris, but for a way lower cost. Same applies to Gon, around the same damage as Goku Black, and Kizaru just has a higher SPA. So yeah, in general, just the legendaries are better than Igris. And as for Sasuke Storm, once again, he has a high cost. His passive ability fires off too slow to actually have any effect in Paragon, and his damage is too low. Now Vegeta Super, he got buffed recently, so he's actually a really good mythic unit for doing this. He's quite cheap, and he has a very high damage output. So yeah, that's good. So now on to S tier. In S tier we have, of course, our secrets and our evolved mythics. So starting from the bottom we have Vegeta Super. He has a decently high cost, and his final upgrade becomes a line AoE, which isn't the best, but if you place him strategically it could be pretty good. Honestly, I would personally just avoid going for the last upgrade and just keep his circle AoE that he gets before that, but yeah. Next is Obito. He has a decent AoE circle and high damage. Cha-In, Blade Dancer, has a really large AoE cone, which is basically like half of an AoE circle, and also really good damage. So she's really good at wiping out smaller enemies. And of course, Sun Jin-Woo has his Arise ability and Igris buff. So he can buff Igris up to an extra, I believe it is 40%, which is a very big impact. And as well as that, he can summon in shadows as units that run across the map and charge at the enemies, which also does a ton of damage, especially the bosses. Now, onto the secrets. Alucard's base form has a full AoE circle, so that's really good for wiping out hordes of enemies. And Naruto's Six Tails should honestly be lower, but I've already got the screenshots, so I'm not going to go back and change it. He should probably be below Cha-In Blade Dancer, but yeah, he has a decent amount of damage. He's got buffed recently, so yeah, he does a lot of damage, and his passive ability also buffs his damage over time, similar to how Sun Jin-Woo's does, with the more kills he gets. So the cap is 36%, while Sun Jin-Woo's is 40%, so he should definitely be under Sun Jin-Woo, but yeah, that's my bad. Now as for Igris, once again, similar to Alucard, it is a full AoE at max, however it does a lot more damage. And as for Alucard's evolution, it's also a full AoE, however it's also a summoner unit like Sun Jin-Woo, and it also debuffs enemies by 20% of their max HP. So it's a very significant debuff. But a problem with every unit in the S tier is that they require a large amount of money to use properly. So that problem is solved by the units in the next tier, or I should say unit in the next tier. So in double S tier we have 3 units, and surprisingly none of them are mythics. So starting us off, we have Pain. Now Pain is a full AoE unit at first, which becomes a circle AoE. But honestly, for Paragon, you probably want to keep him on the 3rd upgrade, because that is where he does the most damage and has the highest AoE. Because he isn't up here because of his damage, he is up here because of his passive ability to push back enemies by 3 seconds, and then they take 3 seconds to return to where they were. So it honestly keeps them in place for about 6 seconds if you really think about it. And as well as this, it stacks enemies on top of each other so that they can receive more damage from circle AoEs, line AoEs, and full AoEs. Another ability that he has is that every time he attacks an enemy, he has his range increased by 40% for 10 seconds. So by using a Pain with Marksman, as well as a combination of his passive ability, he can hit a lot of enemies at once to push them back. So next up we have Crocodile, who is a small range cone AoE unit with low damage. And once again, just like Pain, his strength lies in his passive ability, which slows enemies down for 3 seconds. And considering the fact that Crocodile has a low SPA, this is extremely broken, as he can keep on applying the slowness effect over and over and over. If you place multiple of him along a strip or on the corners, he can just continuously slow hordes of enemies down, once again stacking them on top of each other. Because if certain enemies are slower than others, they are just going to keep clumping together, making it easier for units to kill them. As well as this, if a boss is coming and you're struggling to kill it, it's going too fast, it's about to get out of your range, you can simply sell and replace crocodiles onto the boss to just continuously slow him. And the slowness effect is 50% of their speed, so you can attack them for double the amount of time as you normally would have, which is why he's in the must-have tier. And in the number 1 spot, we have Speedwagon. Now, Speedwagon is the only money unit in the game right now, so he is going to be your main source of income during Paragon mode. By using Speedwagon, you are able to use all of the units in S tier and SS tier to their full potential by getting them to max upgrade. Because without Speedwagon, you will not be able to afford any of the upgrades, or maybe even place any of the mythics. So he is really, really, really a must-have for Paragon mode, Story mode, and Legends mode. So yeah, that's the end of the tier list. If you disagree with anything, leave a comment. If you liked the video, or it helped you in any way, make sure to like and subscribe. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.